so my name's Christoph. I'm Director of Technology Services at Achieve Internet. With me is Alex Borsody. He is the main developer of what we're going to talk about. So yesterday, Mark Shropshire from Media Current talked about progressive web apps in a more generic sense. Today, we're going to tell you a bunch of details about the progressive web app module that we've been a major part of building the Drupal 8 branch and are now co-maintainers of. So, okay, if you haven't gone to Mark's talk, here's the link. It gives you a different level of understanding. It's very worthwhile. Mark and I coordinated that we don't overlap too much. I'm really happy that progressive web apps get major exposure because I firmly believe it is the future of websites for all the reasons that Mark enumerated yesterday. So, first, a few acknowledgements and thanks to various people. The maintainers of the module are Theodore. He's the original author of the service worker and a lot of the magic behind why the service worker that we use in the module actually works well. And we'll go into a bit more detail as we go along. Then Chris Ruppel is basically the maintainer of the D7 branch. He wrote a lot of the stuff in there. Then Alex here is essentially the author of the D8 branch. And then there's myself. I mostly talk.
And a lot of moral support.
That is true. So from an operational perspective, what does a progressive web app do? It's reliable. It loads instantly. It never shows an offline screen, hopefully, to the visitor, even under uncertain network conditions, or say when you're in an airplane, but you actually want to check up on stuff that you've looked at, this type of thing. It's fast. It responds quickly to user interactions, has smooth animations and no janky scrolling. You know, we've seen these things in our own websites, right? So it's with a progressive web app, we want to get closer to that nirvana to give instant gratification to the user. And they're engaging. They feel like a natural app. They give you what you need, no more, no less. It's very immersive, if possible. So this new level of quality allows a progressive web app to earn a place on a user's home screen. From a technical perspective, there are three ingredients. First of all, we're running over HTTPS. You cannot have a progressive web app unless you're running over HTTPS. But having said that, if your site is not on the secure protocol, you've got some work to do because you're shooting yourself in the foot from an SEO perspective and anything else. In today's browsers, it will show non-secure in the URL bar. You don't want to be there because it instantly tells people that they shouldn't be on this website, right? So you're losing engagement. Number two is the service worker. That's a JavaScript component that I'm going to talk about. And number three is the manifest that defines what your progressive web app actually does or is capable of to some extent. So why would you do this? Why would you not, for example, go with a native app for mobile? There's this one first thing, it's one code base, and you've got them all covered. This is amazing. When we ran this by our client that allowed us to build the module, I said, wow, yeah, sign me up. If I don't have to actually build separate Android and iOS code bases, then I absolutely want to be there. Overall, it's a better user experience, and Mark talked about this in detail yesterday, that you increase the engagement because you don't have to go to an app store, you don't have to people that you do have an app. If they land on your website, they're already in the app. So from an owner perspective, you bypass the app store, you don't have to wait. It saves time and cost. I mean, you probably have heard stories how long it takes to get approved in the app store. Even for app updates, it can be weeks. You roll out an update on your website that is a progressive web app, it's right there. Your users get it. And Alex will demo some of this. And you get search engine optimization because you have the speed, which is a big part of PageRank at Google now, and speed. So speed essentially is SEO. And trust me on that one because I've been in the SEO game for a few years now. This stuff does matter. My livelihood at my last job actually depended on this sort of thing. So the cool thing is that a progressive web app really leverages the technologies that we as web developers know well and that a lot of other developers know reasonably well, as opposed to very specific stuff for the native apps. So it really opens up development to a vast swath of folks who are capable of getting mobile apps out there, which I think is really big because it's, I would hazard a guess that it opens up the field to somewhere around 5 to 10 times more developers to get mobile apps out there. All right. So, whoops, that was too much. Where are we? So the building blocks, let's talk about the manifest. Mark showed this yesterday. It's a JSON file that it typically lives in the root of your doc root. And it has a bunch of definitions in there, what your progressive web app is about, how it's going to start, the icons it's going to use. It essentially dictates a lot of the behavior of when you install it on your home screen. So I'm going to just leave it at that. We can go into more details if you want to. Documentation for what the manifest is, it's probably the best one is on Google's site and their developers part. This is a really good resource for progressive web app fundamentals anyway, along with the MDN part of the Mozilla folks. Then let's move to service workers. A service worker is essentially a JavaScript file that runs separately from the main browser thread. And this is huge in my book. I'll get that. So it intercepts network requests and it caches and retrieves resources that are requested. And it can also deliver push messages, but we'll get into that. There's some limitations there. So number one, for the first time in the entire history of JavaScript, we've got some sort of multi-threading. You're off the main thread. You're not going to create jankiness by having even more JavaScript run. In fact, there are now initiatives to push more functionality into service workers off of the main thread, even if it's doesn't have to do with progressive web apps. I think that's a really good development because we already have too much JavaScript in our websites, and it's all on the main thread. It all blocks all the other things that need to happen on your page, and it makes things awful. So that's huge. Though the second thing is that we get fine-grained control over network events, caching strategy, and device capabilities from the service workers. So in some sense, the service worker is basically a network proxy. That makes it super powerful, but the other side of that medal is that you now have a lot of responsibility because you're taking control over everything, and you can get everything wrong if you want. So, number one, the service workers cannot access the DOM directly. To communicate with the page, the service workers uses post message methods, and Alex can talk more about this if you want to learn about this. So it's a new way of thinking about how you get stuff into the DOM, onto the page that you have to get comfortable with. And like I said, we now have a network proxy in there that decides, oh, you want to get to this route, so let me do this. So you get full control over all of this. You can run all sorts of code before you pass on a network request to, say, the mothership or to the cache. Like mentioned previously, it only runs over HTTPS. If you're on HTTP, say during development, your service worker doesn't work. You need HTTPS even in your local development environment for it to work. The reason is you now have a man in the middle that runs code, and you don't want this to be intercepted by a bad actor ever. So basically the decision was made by the Googles of the world and every other people that were involved in early versions of service workers and previous versions of how this stuff works, that we're going to limit ourselves to the secure protocol. The service worker goes idle when you don't use it. So it sits there and it just works when called upon, but otherwise it idles. It doesn't just run all the time like your main thread. And you can use the indexed DB, for storage if you need to persist information across sessions. So for example, long-lasting logins and things. So you get access to all these newfangled things in the browser. And then, of course, the last thing is probably the biggest for the JavaScript developers in the room. It makes extensive use of promises. So if you haven't delved into promises in ES 2015 and later, this is the time you should. So the module. The Drupal 7 module was and is very much complete with a service worker.js file that just works and serves pages served in Cache API. It's been basically a drop-in thing since I first stumbled across it, which was late last year. The Drupal 8 version that Alex coded up now mirrors pretty much what's in Drupal 7, but it also surpasses it in some ways. And he's going to talk about this in more detail in his demo. There is a submodule that is nearing completion now. There's a fairly mature patch that he's going to show that provides better iOS support because Apple doesn't honor all the things in the manifest. You have to output some meta tags and other things, and this is going to be part of the module shortly. So I would say not right now, the Drupal 8 version is more mature if you apply all the patches that are still in flight at the moment. So what does it do? The main benefits are that we're using a service worker for caching and offline capabilities. Once the service worker is active, things are significantly faster. So in particular, all the static assets, JavaScript and CSS, will always be served from local cache, from Cache API in your browser. And then it gets refreshed in the background through a network request back to the mothership. And if there were any changes on the next page refresh that the user initiates, you will get the fresh version. The pages themselves, the nodes, are fetched from the network, just as before, and a copy is kept in the cache. So that is pretty much the caching behavior that you got before Progressive Web App was in the picture. And then images are all cached, regardless of what the caching headers are, unless the safe data header is in there, which we honor, because that's basically a developer who said, if you don't want this, it's cool. And then you have settings on your devices where you can say you want to save data. That is one of the things where developers honor your choices on your phone. So the important thing here is, if you didn't catch that quite, is that we're not really honoring caching headers. We're just making across-the-board decisions. This is the difference. This is where you get the power as a developer when you dive into this world, but you also have to be super careful about not shooting yourself in the foot. So we do get a configurable manifest.json file to make the website installable on supported mobile devices. So there's an admin screen that Alex will show. In total, out of the box, the module gives you enough features so that when you run the Lightbox audit that Mark showed yesterday, that you basically get full marks. It's just going to be about as good as you should be as a baseline. out of the box. Just drop it in and you're good to go. So let's look a bit deeper into pre-caching. The hard part in Drupal, and other CMSs for that matter, is it's hard to know beforehand what it's going to be in all of your arrays about, what your assets are. So traditionally in a semi-static web app that's simple-minded, a one-pager or a fully static website, you simply say, this is my CSS, this is my JavaScript. You put this in the manifest and say, pre-cache this. Or you tell the service worker to do it through basically just hard coding it. We have no idea what our aggregates in Drupal are going to be named. So what we do then is we say, I want to pre-cache page X, Y, and Z, and the service worker will fetch those pages, parse the header, and figure out what all the assets are and get them loaded into cache in the background. And then make it so. That's really the big contribution that Theodore made when he started diving into service workers and how they could work in Drupal, which is fairly different from how they're normally implemented. If you go to generic documentation out there, say Google's own or Microsoft's, the PWA builder website that Mark showed yesterday, this works differently, and it has to for a reason, because we just don't know beforehand what these things are. So on the install event of the service worker, you have a reasonable chance of caching a usable page, including CSS and JavaScript, and you only need to require the site admin to specify a start page, like down here, where we say, yeah, I want the home page, the about page, and the offline page to be pre-cached, which means they're available from the get-go for offline use. Then the fetch listener. This is the core of the service worker. If pre-caching doesn't cover everything, what happens is for each page that we request and put on the browser, we continue populating the cache using a stale while revalidate strategy for the assets. So as you navigate through the site and browse, your cache just gets filled. And at some point, you've got all the things that you need to basically have a large portion of your site available through Cache API so that it's there and super fast to load. Both the install event and the fetch listener use a no-cores mode, so you can actually get assets across domains, such as fonts and other web-based assets, say from a CDN. So that just works transparently because it was coded so you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to fight with cores headers and other crap, which, for those of you who have been there, can be a nightmare. Yes, thanks for the laughs. I mean, we all know, right? Okay, what we do require is PHP 7.2 or greater. One is that we want to be forwards compatible. The other is there were some reasons when we actually made this a hard requirement not too long ago. I don't recall exactly why, but I think it was fairly clear-cut. We need this, right, Alex?
Just because Drupal put it in, just because he wants to stay with the latest technology.
Yeah.
Workers are new technology, and PHP isn't necessarily, so he didn't think that the modern stuff.
Yeah. So if you're not on 7.2, you should anyway, because 7.1 will be end of life next month by the service providers, Acquia, Pantheon, and later this year, I think in December, by PHP.net itself. Your web server must support secure connections. I mentioned this a couple of times. So it's not a choice that we make. It's a requirement that is just a web standard. And the big implication for us as developers is your local must support HTTPS also, otherwise you cannot develop in a meaningful way. Browser support for service workers, you can see lots of green. There are a few outliers. I mean, at this point, we can pretty much forget about Internet Explorer, hopefully, unless you've got some corporate clients who just insist. But it is a progressive enhancement. The site will work. It's a website. If the technology is available, it will be used. If it's not, it'll just degrade, and that's cool. But, you know, with Edge now being based on Chromium anyway, things are looking good. We've got a few outliers over there, Opera Mini. It's like, well, if you're on a mobile and use Opera Mini, you've got yourself to blame, is my attitude there. It's like, this is not a browser. It's a tool that might work or might not. I mean, it breaks on lots of other sites too. So I'm not really worried about this. But the stuff that matters to most of us, if we look at our analytics, is there. I mean, it's mature enough now that we can simply say, let's just do it. It's a progressive enhancement anyway, so the other guys will be okay because they just get the lesser of the experiences, not the enhanced. Some gotchas, and this is where it starts to really matter. Safari, both on desktop and mobile, does not support push notifications. So Apple has just not put this in. And this is also the reason why it's not in the progressive web app module to not give people a thing that they think will work, and then it doesn't on half of their user base or so, right? At some point, I think Apple will see the light and give us access to native push notifications. It's just not clear when. They made two big transitions back in March of last year with version 12.3, I believe. The major upgrades in service worker support became available. That's when service workers and progressive web apps became a thing on iOS and really feasible. Before that, it was pretty much Android and Chrome only. Also, Safari does not completely honor the settings in manifest.json. That's why I mentioned this patch. This is why we're big on this, and it's going to go in, I would say, over the next few days probably, or maybe at least weeks.
We have some people getting involved in it and making some updates to it. Mostly things just manually pass.
Right.
But yeah, probably.
Right. So, I mean, we're basically putting in workarounds until such time that Apple fully supports what's in the manifest so that we don't have to worry about it anymore. Last thing is we don't get support for all the display options in the manifest from Apple. So if you specify in the manifest standalone, it will just go to full screen. If you specify minimal UI, it'll go to browser, but the full browser Chrome. So that, I just mentioned this for completeness. It doesn't bother me a whole lot because you get the two main ones. When I build a PWA or configure it, I like to go full screen because it's just glorious. The browser Chrome's gone, you know, no URL bar, no navigation bar on the bottom, just your website. It feels amazing when your website looks like an app. The catch is, of course, you need to have enough navigation in the site itself to get around. So if your site is not full featured enough that you actually need the navigation bar, or that you need the native sharing that's available from the navigation bar, then yeah, you have to make accommodations there. I hope you all know that as of March this year, Safari allows swipe left and swipe right on an iPhone to go back and forth from your pages. But your users may not know, so you might actually have to display a little message that, by the way, this is how you go back and forth in our app. So, debugging service workers on Chrome. There's a nice resource there. Basically, it's in developer tools, and Alex will demo that. You get full featured access to all the things you need to know, and you can control this thing. On mobile Safari, it's a real beast. You really don't get access. You used to get some access through hooking your phone up to your Mac, but no more. So it's basically unmanageable, and you have to be very careful when you develop and then test your nascent version of a service worker on your iOS device. Of course, if you use the module just out of the box, you'll be mostly fine. But trust me, when we've developed in Q8, this bit is hard many times. On Android, you're fine, because that works like in Chrome. You get access to it as documented by Google on this site that I have up there. So, what are we going to do next in the module? Before I hand it over to Alex to dive deep, to give you a deep dive, we want to do the broadcast cache update, which is a fourth caching strategy in service workers, where you basically display the cached page, which may be stale, and you get the updated content from the server in the background, which is already there in the strategy we use for the static assets. But then this code would broadcast available updated content to the page so that your main thread knows what's going on. And the way I'm thinking about this is you just display from cache really fast. You display a little spinner somewhere so that the user knows that things are going on in the background. And then when there is fresh content available as per broadcast, that we simply redisplay the page or update the page and stop the spinner at some point. And we'll have to figure that one out.
The way I have it now is it actually displays if new content's available.
Oh.
A
little button.
I like this idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that's different thoughts about it. And I think the button is like, you have new content, tap here to refresh. I've seen this in a couple of apps too, and that's a great first iteration of it. But ideally, I'd like to automate this, but at least give the user an indication that things are happening. And when the refresh happens and you get that slight jankiness in the display, that they know why, right? So anyway, that would be the nirvana. It's like you go to a page and boom, it's right there. Like it takes about 0.1 seconds at most, as opposed to, 2 seconds or more. So you sort of stay. The way I look at performance is blink of an eye is that we're all hardwired to survive back when we lived in caves. When you faced a saber-toothed tiger, you can blink once and you're still going to survive, hopefully. So that's where our attention just stays, right there. That's hardwired in our brains. We can be pretty good about a delay of maybe half a second up to maybe 2 seconds, because you can train yourself to stay mentally focused. Beyond 2 seconds, most of our minds wander. I know mine does. You start to disengage from the content. So, which is why I'm really big on, can we give the user the content right now? Because they don't have to spend any mental energy at all to stay in the moment and be right there. So performance matters not just from a marketing and conversion standpoint, but just because this is how we function as humans. That's what we're wired to do. All right, so I'll hand it, before we go to the thank yous, hand it over to Alex, who is going to demo a few of the inner workings of.
So this branch, it's not the dev branch, it's not the release branch, it is a patch, and it's the meta tags. So basically, this is for iOS it's a submodule we have for iOS to take care of their idiosyncrasies, and they have meta tags that basically make it more app-like. That could be changing, so it's kind of, I think of it almost, it's not the most greatest technical achievement. We're outputting meta tags and we're picking colors for them. But what's cool is that, like, there's conversations going on in the queue about, oh, someone heard that this meta tag is actually great. Oh, and this one actually does that. And it's like a single source of documentation. And they can actually come to Drupal issue queue to learn all about progressive web apps, and like they could apply that to their single page apps or pretty much anywhere. So what we're doing technically is outputting meta tags, which is pretty simple to do. So this Mr. Poly Driver, contributed this one, cool British dude, basically found out that if we add all of these, then you get a start screen basically when you click the home screen button icon. So that's cool. It was kind of not very well documented, but he found it. So these are some other Apple Touch icons. Basically, what these will do is will allow it to open in full screen, and we make them optional because, like Christoph was saying before, it's like navigation isn't always the easiest. So until that gets up to speed, even though it has swipe gestures now, not everyone knows about that. It's new. So all these meta tags are optional. Apple Touch one is required now by the Lighthouse PWA score as of like May. So that one's an important one. So like the cool thing about this is like there's lots of like great help text we can add to make it more just like description text to add some like documentation like each meta tag. So like there's lots to do if anyone wants to contribute to the queue. We like help. So yeah, that's that. That's what makes this branch different, and there's a lot of discussion going on there. Okay, so this is what it looks like. It's a form, and you have the app name. And this is all metadata. So basically, in the future, you got like Christoph was making some great points. Like right now, like the description tag, for example, like it doesn't show on the icon on the home screen. Like the only thing the user is going to really see, and that really makes too much of a difference, is the short name, because that shows on the home screen. The description doesn't really show anywhere, so like what's the point? Just leave it blank. What's the description of my PWA? But there's going to be aggregators, there's going to be app stores hopefully in the future. I think there are now, and they might be using this metadata. So you might want to think about it like a meta tag, like in your HTML or something, the meta description tag. So think ahead. That's kind of like what we have to do here, since it's a new technology, and just think ahead, and maybe your idea one day will become the next, Chrome type of idea. Okay, so start URL, that's a cool one. It's so cool that it's only for Android right now. Apple doesn't want to get it in quite yet. It really makes it feel a lot like an app, because when you click that icon, you get redirected anywhere. You can get redirected to like an app-specific page. Right now, it'll just go to I think iOS, it'll just go to the home page. But if you have if you really want it to be an app, you're going to want the people coming from that icon to see something maybe specific, so you can redirect them anywhere. So that's Android only now. If I have to make assumptions, like I'm gonna guess that, like I was saying before, it's almost like we're in a browser war type situation, and there's things are getting pushed forward, and progressive web apps are going to be they're the best technology, so they're going to win in some form or another, and we can kind of shape that. Theme color, that's that cool little color at the top of the browser bar, just one meta tag, and then your app looks awesome. Like you can make it red, you can make it blue. I don't know if you've seen Facebook, it's blue. Looks pretty cool. A lot more apps are doing that lately. Standalone, that means you have like the status bar at the top that shows your battery. Christoph was talking about that. It's my favorite, and actually I like full screen too. But if you look at a lot of apps now, they're actually using standalone, like native apps. So that's actually worth mentioning. This is a cool setting. Basically means that if you're behind, somebody contributed a patch to it, it was a good idea. The manifest doesn't load if you're behind basic off, and a lot of dev sites are. Manifest image, that's a pretty important one. It's your at home screen icon. Comes default with the DrupalCons. and which are Drupal icons. This is like kind of like what we were talking about, which is like the beauty of the this module, which is basically pre-caching all the assets so it can work offline, and basically it uses like an in Drupal 8, you have the HTTP request object, which is like the guzzle, and it just pulls in, it's internal, and it pulls in all the JS and CSS from the pages, even though they haven't loaded. It's pre-cache, even though you haven't visited them, and they're visible offline before you even hit them up. That's pretty cool.
So slash offline is a Drupal term. Is you set it up as sort of like your homepage or something as well. See, like Note 10 is your homepage. But offline, is it alias to that? Or?
Offline is there's a discussion actually in the issue queue of making the offline a customizable node, but right now it's there's one template for that, and that's all you have.
Yeah. In more broad terms,
and that'll be your offline page, like when you visit the site offline,
Well,
as you know about that.
I'm saying in Drupal, we need to create a node.
Yes. Check the issue queue, because actually one of the top issues right now is making that a customizable node.
yeah.
So that could be somewhere that we could use some help with a patch,
Right.
making it customizable.
But you do get a branded offline page as opposed to your site is offline from the browser itself, which is a boring gray page. You get that branded, still looking like
I'll
your
show you
site,
that
like
now.
your app, which is one of the cool features of if there's no content, at least you stay brand consistent.
Yeah. So you're eager to see the offline page. So something cool about that is that will show if it's not pre-cached, and this page would not be pre-cached. It's just a bunch of. So that will show the offline page if you're offline. So. Pretty cool. As far as making it a node, check the issue queue. I think it's like 3 down, and we need some help with that. Okay, so then URLs to exclude. There's definitely URLs you're going to want to exclude because it's a new technology, and there will be certain functionality that you don't want to use this. You'll find out when things break, and you just add it to the exclude URLs. Goes back to like you're going to want a strong QA team if you're going to implement a progressive web app, just to make sure that every single page works with it. By default, you want to exclude admin because there's no reason for admin to have things cached offline. And the user page, there's some issue with like the password reset that Drupal found. I actually found some issues also on just having it user in general. So we exclude anything /user right now, but if you want to test that, we need help. Cache version, this is a cool strategy that Drupal came up with, which is it's Drupal only right now, actually. No other platform is doing this that I can see. Basically, by incrementing the cache, you can invalidate the cache on the user's local, and that will, if you make a lot of changes, to the site, basically the help text says, use it when assets have significantly changed, or you want to force a cache refresh from other clients. So you want them to pull all their local cache API. You want that to all be fresh. You can just force that right there, and I can show you how later in the service worker. How about now? Okay, so it's pretty cool. This is where all the magic is, and this thing's pretty fun if you haven't ever seen it. This is where it is. This is the service worker, and we can go back online for now, I guess. So you have this. You have the manifest, which you've seen before. Magical, and it's all markup. So we really don't have to go into that anymore. But yeah, I think I've gone through it twice. A lot you can do with that, and it's just pretty much just markup. So service worker is pretty Drupal specific and pretty special in this module. A lot of people have contributed to it, and it's just perfect for Drupal. Like, we're at DrupalCamp, we're working with Drupal. It's going to be, Drupal has a lot of idiosyncrasies that you're going to need this specific service worker. The caching strategy, in particular, pre-caching the assets. We talked about with Workbox, we use what's called a pre-cache manifest, which is basically a list of all assets. Manifest has nothing to do with the manifest JSON, just there to confuse you. But it's just a list of assets, which we're getting, Workbox has a command line tool. It searches your server for all the JS, compresses it, CSS. That's your manifest. Those are the assets that you're going to pre-cache. Drupal doesn't have that, as Christoph said, because you don't know what that URL is going to be. So, the magic here is that they use this internal HTTP request, and it extracts it from the headers, and then you get all these beautiful cache URL assets, which when you visit a page offline, even though you haven't visited it, it will load. So that's pretty cool. And I can actually show you that right now. We'll go offline. And let's see what we loaded. Nodes 1, 2, 3. So we're offline right now. And I don't even have to visit this page. Well, let's see. Yeah, so I put a huge image here, and this is all serving from cache.
Note the speed.
Yeah, it's because it's just I put a ton of high-res images here, and then if you check the network tab, you see where it's pulling from. It'll actually show that it's coming from the service worker. Yeah, see, size. No size, because it's from the service worker. It's local. So that's pretty cool. What else can I fit in here? Show you guys. Cache storage. This is pretty cool. This is where everything's stored, all those cool assets that you saw. And if you go to a page and it's not in the pre-cache assets, it'll be stored here after you visit it. So
Note the V2 in there. That correlates to the 2 in his settings. And it would be V3 when he increments to 3, right?
This little thing. Talking about the V2 right there.
So you switch to a whole new cache if you increment, and it totally invalidates what's in the user's browser and keeps you safe.
That's that. Yeah, it's a pretty cool idea that there's another really cool thing that's in the service worker, which is the uninstall event. If I have time to show that real quick. When the module is uninstalled, basically it hits a URL, and it's created by the module /PWA, phone home or something, I don't remember. And if it's not there, it'll unregister the service worker. So, and clear out all the cache, which is just kind of responsible development. So that's specific idea just to this module, because you have the module creating the URL, and when the URL is gone, it's called the phone home event, and it hits the URL and it's not there, so it unregisters it. Pretty cool. That's in the service worker. Down here in the bottom, if you want to look, uninstall service worker, unregister, and that's pretty cool. What else can we go over?
Well, let's do Q&A.
Yeah, let's do Q&A. That's pretty. There's more to show, but that's pretty much the cool parts. There's more cool parts to come, but that's what we got down now, for the most part.
Got a question here.
Much of the decision to whether it makes sense to use this for a site is based on whether the site has content that makes sense offline. So if it's the kind of site where you really can't use it offline, it's interactive, with real-time updates, but it still makes sense.
You still get a faster user experience. You still get the SEO benefit from that. So I would say 60 to 70% try it, at least. And we're debating this internally because we've got a whole bunch of websites that we're building right now that are similar use cases like yours, and we're thinking maybe it still makes sense to throw it in there just because we can, and it will work better and smoother for the people who use it. And yeah, we may not get all the benefits. The offline capability is just one because it's also faster inherently and smoother and installable, right? So I think that's a huge benefit. We're big in the developer portal space right now. And if you've ever been in the API space and coded against API, sometimes you live for a couple of weeks in the documentation. It's sort of nice to have that on your home screen and while you're on the bus or whatever, on the plane, to just peruse some of that stuff and it's still there. So at first I thought, nah, that's silly. We're not going to use it in developer portals. And then I rethought the thought and said, well, actually, I think we should. So I think give it a shot and see what it does for you. And decide and go from there. It's just a drop-in thing. You can drop it back out. It will uninstall the service worker on your device on its own because the module-generated URL disappears. So you should be reasonably safe.
Can you clarify a little bit more about what the modules are actually providing? It seems like the manifest piece is kind of minor form you fills out. Then the service worker seems like the core of the module. Is that correct? And
Definitely, because the manifest, they're building basically into core. So at some point, it's just going to go away. It's like no point in having.
Yeah,
It's
there's
like
a core
just
issue
generating
if
a
you care
manifest.
to look to bring a manifest, a generic manifest to core and make it pluggable by various modules, because there's other modules out there that also pump out a manifest. There is one about site icons that we're aware of, and I'm sure there are others.
So this is providing, so the meat of this module is the service worker. So is that really like what's in charge of this offline behavior? Are there like additional things that it's doing?
It's just in the service worker. The offline stuff is all.
Sorry, are there additional things that the service worker is doing here that besides the offline?
That's a great question, and honestly, it's just mostly offline behavior. Yeah, so there's a lot of things we can do that are really cool. Like, we can do push notifications. We decided not to do that because it's Android only. It's like, not worth it. Wait a little bit, it may be worth it. A lot of people, there are modules that are doing that now, service worker push notifications. There's a session in the queue if we want to implement it. You got opinions on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'll see how it goes. But, thinking beyond, you could, for example, fork the module or write a submodule of your own for other things you want to do in the service worker, because it is essentially a network proxy. You could just put a randomizing function in there for a route that's requested and give you client-side A/B testing, say, right? By just saying go A or B based on a quick randomizing thing, because you have that network proxy straight in the client as opposed to using, say, Optimizely, go back to the mothership, get a decision from Optimizely, go back to the client, and go back to your mothership, which is a horrible user experience. You could do all sorts of other cool things, because suddenly for every route that's requested, you don't just get to decide in Drupal, you get to decide in the service worker what you're going to do. So you can put logic behind that and do things that are
there's
appropriate
ideas.
for your use case.
There's room for cool ideas.
The service worker that comes with this is designed to be extended to just add on functionality like that.
You'd have to submit a patch to the queue. It's like if you wanted to branch it.
It's not like a submodule kind of thing where you
there's really not a whole lot of like, that would be a cool idea, like make it like hackable, but
Building in an API type thing. Right now, you would really get deep into the guts, but you can do it. I mean, we're doing it with the meta tag submodule.
if you wanted to like change your service worker on your own module, it's just a matter of going to the JavaScript file and adding some JavaScript. And then if it's cool, submit it back to us. Yeah, it's really.
Other questions? It seems to me this is the ideal future. You're doing a bunch of prefetch a lot of stuff. There may be not for one, you would post and they respond, cash back, response.
You still do that? Does post still work?
Check the fetch handler. Yes, I believe that you can do post requests. It's you want to check fetch handler documentation, then you can.
Fetch handler in the module, fetch handler
And JavaScript, fetch handler, service worker. Google's got great documentation for all that. Their documentation is really good. So
Yeah, I stumbled across this a few months ago. I think it does post, because I mean, even with a post, you get static assets back. Those can totally come from cache while you're waiting for the network request based on what the post did, right?
yeah, I don't know in context what you'd be trying to do, but yeah, you can definitely do that.
Cool. Any other questions? If not, thank you for coming. It's been, oh, sorry, yeah, there we go.
So I think you mentioned no course to bypass same origin policy, but is that like fully open or there's some restrictions to guard against some security threats? Say that again? The no course option to get resources from different origin.
Oh, the cross origin? There's no setting to disable that right now, but that allows you to like basically pull in Google fonts. So if you're, or it's a good example, Google fonts, but any third party. I mean, if you're including it in your site, it's going to be, you're probably going to want it there. It extracts it from the head tag, the header, whatever's in the head. So yeah, making those cross origin just makes the offline experience smoother, because if you're pre-caching, you're missing, for example, the fonts, then when you visit those pages offline, they're going to have some broken fonts.
But I think you're right. It has security implications because the service worker now basically doesn't honor course headers. And I think in the future, we need to be a bit more fine-grained.
Can you comment in the queue about that and get a discussion going? Because I don't know.
I mean, I mean, people put in course headers for a reason, right? And maybe at minimum, making this a configurable thing where you say, I need those domains to be open, and we set the course header appropriately or something like that might be a good compromise solution. So yeah, I need Google Fonts, and I know I need this CDN. I'm pulling jQuery from the CDN rather than from the mothership, right? Stuff like that.
Yeah, if you got a Drupal.org code file.
All right, thank you.